The screen went black, a sudden void after the sterile glow of the pre-call waiting room. Then, a flicker, a stutter, and it bloomed back to life, revealing a grid of faces, each one a small window into a different world, a different room. Mine was there, nestled in the corner, a postage stamp of myself that I desperately tried to imbue with an air of composure. Inside, however, my heart was performing a frantic, percussive assault against my ribs, a wild drum solo I couldn't silence. $18,000. Gone. Poof. And now, I was expected to sit here, on this pre-scheduled investor call, a supposedly routine quarterly update, and pretend that everything was not just perfectly normal, but thriving. It had started, as these things so often do, with a handshake and a promise. A shiny, impossibly new opportunity that, in retrospect, screamed too good to be true, yet the man behind it, Mr. Silas Croft, possessed an aura of effortless success so potent, so convincing, it had disarmed my inherent skepticism. He'd spoken with a quiet authority, his words flowing like a well-rehearsed aria of financial prudence. Diversification, he'd murmured, the very word a soothing balm. Steady returns, the promise of a reliable harvest. And, of course, the ultimate siren song, making my hard-earned savings work harder for me, a notion that had initially sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. My savings weren't merely abstract figures on a digital ledger. They represented years of meticulous budgeting, of conscious choices to forego fleeting pleasures, of silent, almost sacred pacts with myself that I was building a cushion, a tangible safety net against the unpredictable winds of life. But Silas was so disarmingly charming, his office, a testament to understated luxury, so impeccably sleek, and the testimonials he'd so readily provided, each glowing with fervent praise, had seemed utterly, undeniably solid. So, I'd taken the plunge, a hesitant leap of faith. The initial transfer felt like a significant step, a definitive commitment, but the subsequent confirmation emails, the initial modest statements that showcased a small, almost imperceptible, yet steady uptick, they had all conspired to lull me into a dangerous, deeply flawed sense of security. Then, the silence began to descend, not with a bang, but with a creeping, insidious stillness. First, the response times to my increasingly frequent queries stretched from mere hours to days. Soon, emails, once answered with prompt efficiency, went unanswered altogether. Phone calls were met with the soulless efficiency of automated messages or vague, airy promises of a callback that, predictably, never materialized. A cold dread, a premonition of something profoundly wrong, began to creep in, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift from mild concern to a gnawing, persistent anxiety that coiled in my stomach. I started to dig, tentatively at first, like probing a sensitive wound. Online searches, initially conducted with a degree of detachment, began to reveal a disturbing pattern of remarkably similar complaints, hushed whispers and fragmented narratives of a company that seemed to operate in a perpetual, murky gray area, leaving a trail of disheartened investors in its wake. The smooth, polished veneer of Silas Croft, once so alluring, began to crack, revealing something far rougher, far more unsettling beneath the surface. This investor call, this scheduled meeting, was ostensibly meant to be a routine quarterly update. A chance for Silas to, presumably, offer reassurance, to explain away any minor dips or fluctuations, to reinforce our collective confidence in his stewardship. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the very bone, a cold, hard knot of dread tightening in my chest, that there would be no reassurance forthcoming. The funds weren't invested, not in any tangible, verifiable way. They were gone. Vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the hollow echo of my misplaced trust. The burning question now, the one that throbbed behind my temples, was not if he would lie, but how he would spin it, what elaborate tapestry of half-truths and outright fabrications he would weave this time. The call began. Silas, as always, was impeccably dressed, a vision of polished professionalism as he smiled directly into his camera. His voice, a smooth, resonant instrument, flowed effortlessly, each word practiced and delivered with the precision of a seasoned orator. He spoke of market volatility, a familiar scapegoat, of strategic repositioning, a nebulous concept that offered little concrete information, and of exciting new ventures on the horizon, always on the horizon, never quite here. My gaze was locked onto his face, dissecting every fleeting micro-expression, every subtle shift in his gaze, every pregnant pause. He mentioned project delays, unforeseen complications, the standard lexicon of business setbacks that sounded reassuringly mundane. But he ever, not once, directly addressed the elephant in the room, the glaring absence of my money, and presumably, the investments of others on this call. It was as if my $18,000, and all the others, had simply ceased to exist, erased from the financial universe. He then opened the floor for questions, a calculated maneuver designed to project transparency. A few investors, bless their naive hearts, their faces etched with polite anticipation, asked about projected timelines, about the security of their assets. Silas fielded their inquiries with practiced ease, his answers as evasive as smoke, circular and ultimately uninformative. Then, it was my turn. My voice, when I finally found it, felt surprisingly steady, a small island of calm in the rising tide of my anxiety. "Mr. Croft," I began, my voice amplified by the microphone, its sudden clarity cutting through the polite hum of the call like a sharp knife. "I haven't received any communication regarding my account for the past 6 weeks. My initial investment, $18,000, seems to have disappeared without a trace. Can you provide a specific explanation for its whereabouts?" The silence that followed was profound, a suffocating blanket that descended upon the virtual room. Silas's practiced smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible tremor that I seized upon. The grid of faces on my screen shifted, heads tilted in unison, eyes widening with a shared dawning realization. A few individuals leaned closer to their microphones, as if straining to catch Silas's every whispered breath, every subtle inflection. He cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. "Ah, yes," he began, his tone shifting subtly, the smooth polish of his earlier pronouncements beginning to chip away. "We've had some administrative oversights. Minor administrative oversights. Rest assured, your funds are secure." "Secure where, Mr. Croft?" I pressed, my voice remaining calm, though laced now with an unyielding firmness, a steel spine emerging where there had been only apprehension. "My statements are blank. My calls are unanswered. This is not an administrative oversight. This is a significant sum of money, and I deserve a clear, honest answer. Where is my $18,000? Another beat of silence, longer this time, more charged with unspoken tension. Then, a faint rustle from another participant's end, a hesitant clearing of a throat. Mine too, a woman's voice, tight with a raw, undisguised panic, finally broke the spell. "I've been trying to reach you for months." And then, it cascaded. The dam had broken. One by one, other voices joined the fray, their initial politeness dissolving rapidly into a torrent of frustration, then blooming into a raw, palpable fear. The carefully constructed facade of Silas Croft's impeccable business, so meticulously built, was crumbling in real time, its fragile structure laid bare by a simple, direct question about missing money. He stammered, his carefully chosen words dissolving into incoherence. He deflected, attempting to steer the conversation back to his pre-prepared script. He even, in a moment of almost pathetic desperation, attempted a mild threat about the disruption to the call, as if chastising unruly schoolchildren. But it was too late. The shared anxiety, the unspoken suspicions that had been simmering beneath the surface, were now out in the open, a collective roar of indignation. He tried desperately to regain control, to shut down the torrent of questions, to end the call prematurely, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and something akin to desperation. But the moment had passed. The faces on the screen, once passive, disengaged investors, were now a unified chorus of accusatory voices, their demands echoing through the virtual space, demanding answers, demanding their money back. Silas's face, usually so controlled, so impeccably impassive, was now a mask of barely suppressed panic, the carefully constructed illusion of his authority, his success, shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The call ended abruptly, not with a polite farewell or a promise of future updates, but with Silas's feed abruptly cutting out, leaving behind a grid of bewildered, angry, and undeniably informed faces. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, not exactly. There was no victorious leap, no exultant shout. Instead, a profound sense of quiet resolve settled over me, a calm after the storm. I hadn't destroyed him, or ruined his life in any dramatic, cinematic fashion. I had simply, and perhaps most importantly, shone a light on the truth, illuminating the darkness that he had so carefully cultivated. In the days and weeks that followed, the whispers amplified. The investor call, which was supposed to have been a routine, uneventful quarterly update, became the subject of hushed conversations in online forums, in worried phone calls between former investors. Silas Croft's reputation, meticulously built over years on a foundation of superficial charm and perceived success, began to fray at the edges, its carefully woven fabric unraveling. Potential new investors, the lifeblood of any such enterprise, hesitated, their initial interest cooled by the growing tide of suspicion. Existing ones, emboldened by my directness, by the fact that someone had finally dared to speak the unspeakable, became more vocal, their cautious inquiries morphing into outright demands. The carefully curated image of infallibility was gone, replaced by a pervasive cloud of doubt and suspicion. He was still out there, I knew, likely already piecing together a new strategy, searching for new avenues for his particular brand of business, his subtle manipulation. But that day, on that call, he had been exposed. And for me, watching the subtle shifts in his carefully constructed demeanor, witnessing the silent, almost imperceptible acknowledgement from others who had been equally ignored, equally deceived, was, in its own quiet way, enough. The money was still gone, a painful, tangible reminder of misplaced trust and naive optimism. But the suffocating silence that had once held me captive had finally been broken, replaced by a quiet, unshakable understanding that sometimes, the most powerful action one can take is simply to speak the truth, however difficult, however uncomfortable that truth may be.